Picture a map of Italy being torn into three pieces: north, center, south, three fragments that look like they belong to the same country, but genetically tell three completely different stories. Because here's what they don't teach you in history class. Italy became a unified country in 1861. Before that, it was a battlefield. And the armies that crossed this narrow peninsula for 3,000 years didn't just conquer cities. They rewrote the genetic code of everyone living there. Italian isn't a genetic identity, it's a political one. A man from Milan and a man from Palermo are both Italian citizens, but genetically, the distance between them is larger than the distance between that Milanese and a German from Munich. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your DNA test might say French, Greek, or Middle Eastern instead of Italian, and why that's not a mistake. It's the truth hidden in your genes. To understand Italian DNA, you need to meet the man who started it all. In 1991, two German hikers climbing through the Ötzi Alps on the border between Austria and Italy found something impossible: a body melting out of a glacier. At first, they thought it was a recent death, a hiker who got lost in a storm. But when archaeologists arrived, they realized this wasn't a modern tragedy. It was a 5,300-year-old time capsule. The body was so perfectly preserved by ice that his last meal, ibex meat and einkorn wheat, was still in his stomach. They called him Ötzi the Iceman, Europe's oldest natural mummy. And in 2012, scientists did something that would change our understanding of European genetics forever. They sequenced his entire genome. What they found shocked everyone. Among modern Europeans, Ötzi's DNA was most similar to Sardinians, not to people living in the Alps where he died, not to Austrians or northern Italians, to islanders living 500 miles south in the Mediterranean. This made no sense, unless you understand something fundamental about Italy. The people who live there today are not the descendants of the people who lived there 5,000 years ago. They're the descendants of everyone who invaded since. But Otzi represents something crucial. He's the genetic baseline, the anchor point. Before the invasions began, the Italian peninsula was populated by people like him. Copper Age farmers who had migrated from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, about 7,000 years ago, bringing agriculture to Europe. These Anatolian farmers make up roughly 55% of all Italian ancestry today. They're the glue that holds Italian DNA together, the one thing Northerners and Southerners still share. But what happened next is what tore the country apart genetically. Let's start with northern Italy: Milan, Venice, Turin, Genoa, cities that feel more European than Mediterranean. There's a reason for that. The Alps weren't a wall, they were a bridge. For 2,000 years, wave after wave of Celtic and Germanic tribes crossed those mountains and settled in the fertile Po Valley. The Gauls came first, around 400 BC. They founded Mediolanum, Milan, and dominated northern Italy for centuries. Then came the Lombards, Germanic warriors who poured into Italy in 568 AD after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. They didn't just raid and leave, they settled so heavily that they renamed the entire region Lombardy, the land of the Lombards. When geneticists analyze Y chromosome markers in northern Italians today, they find something remarkable. Haplogroup R1b, the dominant paternal lineage in Western and Central Europe, appears in over 50% of northern Italian men. This is the genetic signature of those ancient Celtic and Germanic migrations. But it gets more specific. When you look at autosomal DNA, the chromosomes we inherit from both parents, northern Italians cluster genetically, not with southern Italians but with their neighbors across the Alps. A person from Venetia is genetically closer to someone from Slovenia or Austria than to someone from Calabria. Someone from Piedmont shares more DNA with the French than with Sicilians. The haplogroup frequencies tell the story clearly. In Friuli, Venezia Giulia, the region bordering Austria and Slovenia, haplogroup I1, a Nordic marker, reaches 22%. In Trentino Alto Adige, 21%. These are frequencies you'd expect in Scandinavia, not the Mediterranean. The North absorbed so much Germanic and Celtic DNA that it became genetically Central European. Now shift your focus 600 miles south, to Calabria, Puglia, Basilicata, the heel and toe of Italy's boot. This is where everything changes. For 5 centuries, from roughly 800 to 300 BC, southern Italy wasn't Italian at all. It was Greek, so Greek that the Romans called it Magna Graecia, Greater Greece. Colonies from different Greek city-states planted themselves along the southern coast and in Sicily. Taras, modern Taranto, was founded by Spartans. Sybaris, famous for its luxury, was Achaean. Croton, home of the philosopher Pythagoras, was also Achaean. These weren't trading posts. They were full Greek cities with theaters, temples, and populations that dwarfed anything in Greece itself. And they left genetic evidence that still echoes today. When researchers analyze southern Italian DNA, they find haplogroup J2 at frequencies of 20 to 25%. J2 is the Greco-Anatolian marker, rare in northern Europe but common throughout Greece, Turkey, and the ancient Greek world. But here's what's fascinating. Modern Calabrians and Sicilians show stronger genetic affinity to ancient Greek populations from Crete and Cyprus than people living in Athens do today. The Greeks who colonized southern Italy preserved an ancient genetic signature that was later diluted in mainland Greece by subsequent invasions and migrations. Then came the Arabs. In 827 AD, North African Muslims invaded Sicily. They didn't leave for 250 years. During that time, the Emirate of Sicily became one of the wealthiest and most cultured states in the Mediterranean. Palermo rivaled Baghdad in splendor. The genetic impact was profound. Studies show that up to 30% of Sicilian ancestry can be traced to North African and Middle Eastern sources, not evenly distributed. It's concentrated in specific regions, especially Western Sicily, where Arab rule was strongest. The haplogroup frequencies are unmistakable. Haplogroup E1b1b, which originated in North Africa and the Horn of Africa, appears in 20 to 30% of Sicilians. Compare that to northern Italy, where E1b1b rarely exceeds 5%. The further south you go in Italy, the more Middle Eastern and North African the gene pool becomes. Now, pause for a second. We've looked at the Germanic North and the Greek Arab South, but in the center of the peninsula, buried in the hills of Tuscany, lies a genetic cold case that wasn't solved until 2021. The Etruscans. They were the first superpower of Italy. Long before Rome was an empire, the Etruscans were draining swamps, building arches, and trading with the world, but they were a total anomaly. Their language was alien, unrelated to Latin, Greek, or German. It was a linguistic ghost from a lost era. For 2,500 years, historians believed the migrant theory. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus claimed the Etruscans must have come from Turkey because their art looked Eastern and their language was so strange. It made sense, until we looked at the DNA. In a groundbreaking 2021 study, scientists extracted DNA from 82 ancient Etruscan skeletons, and the results rewrote the history books. They weren't migrants from Turkey. They weren't from the East at all. Genetically, they were locals. They were almost identical to the Latin people living right next door. This created what scientists now call the Etruscan paradox. How could two neighbors have the same DNA but speak completely unrelated languages? The answer reveals something profound about Italian resistance. While the rest of Italy was adopting the new Indo-European languages brought by invaders, the Etruscans refused. They were a culture of resistance. They accepted the genes of their neighbors but held onto the language and identity of their ancestors for another 1,000 years. And this legacy isn't dead. Genetic samples from modern inhabitants of isolated Tuscan valleys like Casentino and Volterra show a unique genetic continuity that dates back to the Iron Age. While the rest of Italy was mixing, the Etruscans and their descendants held their ground. But wait, what about the Romans? They built an empire that lasted 1,000 years. They gave their name to the city and the language. Surely Roman DNA dominates central Italy, right? This is where it gets really interesting. When geneticists extracted DNA from skeletons buried in Imperial Rome, in Pompeii, in Roman cemeteries across Lazio, they found something unexpected. The original Romans, the Latin people who founded the city in 753 BC, had been genetically swamped by immigrants from the Eastern Mediterranean. By the height of the Roman Empire in the 2nd century AD, Rome was the most cosmopolitan city on earth. Slaves, merchants, soldiers, and administrators flooded in from across the empire. Syria, Judea, Egypt, North Africa, Greece, Anatolia, and they didn't just visit, they stayed, they married, they had children. DNA from Imperial Roman cemeteries shows significant ancestry from the Levant and North Africa. The genetic signature of this eastern influx persists in modern Central Italians, though diluted by later migrations from Northern Europe. Here's a connection that surprises people. Southern Italians and Ashkenazi Jews are genetic cousins. Why? Because 2,000 years ago, Jewish merchants, artisans, and slaves settled in southern Italy and Sicily in large numbers. Some converted, some intermarried. The genetic legacy remains. Studies consistently show that Ashkenazi Jews have significant Southern European ancestry, much of it specifically Southern Italian. The connection runs deep enough that geneticists can model Ashkenazi ancestry as roughly 50% Levantine and 50% European, with a substantial portion of that European component, about 30%, coming from Southern Italy. The Roman DNA story isn't about purity, it's about cosmopolitanism. The empire's capital became a melting pot that drew people from 3 continents. And that mixture is still visible in the genetics of modern Romans and Central Italians. Now let's talk about Italy's 2 major islands, Sicily and Sardinia. They're both Italian, both Mediterranean islands, but genetically, they're opposites. Sicily embraced every invader, Greeks, Romans, Vandals, Byzantines, Arabs, Normans. Each wave left genetic signatures. Modern Sicilians are one of the most mixed populations in Europe, a Mediterranean mosaic of African, Middle Eastern, and European ancestry. But Sardinia did something different. It locked its doors. When geneticists analyze Sardinian DNA, they're looking at a genetic time capsule. About 50% of Sardinian ancestry comes from early Neolithic farmers. Another 10 to 20% comes from Western hunter-gatherers, the Ice Age people who lived in Europe before agriculture arrived. These are percentages you don't see anywhere else in Europe. The Bronze Age migrations that transformed the European gene pool, the Yamnaya pastoralists from the Eurasian steppe who brought Indo-European languages and dramatically altered European genetics between 5,000 and 4,000 years ago, barely touched Sardinia. The island's mountainous terrain and relative isolation created what geneticists call a founder effect, so extreme that 80% of modern Sardinian mitochondrial DNA belongs to haplogroups that are specific to Sardinia. You won't find them anywhere else on Earth. Not in Sicily, not in mainland Italy, nowhere. When researchers analyze the Y chromosome diversity in Sardinia, they find haplogroup I2A1, marked by the M26 mutation, at 38% frequency. This is a pre-Neolithic hunter-gatherer lineage that was largely replaced everywhere else in Europe, but survived in Sardinia's mountain refuges. If you want to see what a European looked like 8,000 years ago, before the great migrations and invasions that reshaped the continent, look at a Sardinian. The genetic difference between Sardinia and Sicily is so stark that they could be from different continents. Sicily absorbed every influence. Sardinia resisted them all. That's why Ötzi's closest living relatives aren't in the Alps. They're on an island that preserved ancient DNA long after the rest of Europe was transformed. But genes aren't the only evidence. Italy's complexity is written in its place names and surnames. The cultural DNA that survived when everything else changed. In northern Italy, surnames like Lombardi and Longobardi point to Lombard ancestry. Guarnieri and Rainieri are Germanic warrior names. City names tell the same story. Gualdo comes from the Germanic word wald, meaning forest. Trento reflects Germanic phonetics. These are linguistic fossils proving that Germanic peoples didn't just invade. They stayed and reshaped the culture. Move south and the names change. Greco, literally meaning Greek, is a common southern Italian surname. Caruso derives from the Latin carosus, but it entered Italian through Greek karos. Marsala, Sicily's famous fortified wine city, gets its name from the Arabic Mars Allah, the port of God. Caltanissetta, another Sicilian city, comes from the Arabic Kalat Nisa, fortress of women. Every name is a genetic marker in linguistic form. You can map Italy's invasions just by reading road signs and census records. The north speaks Germanic, the south speaks Greek and Arabic, the center speaks Latin filtered through centuries of cosmopolitan mixture. This isn't one country genetically. It's three distinct populations who share a peninsula and a political identity, but whose DNA tells completely different stories. So when you take a DNA test and expect to see Italian and instead you see French, Germanic, Greek, Middle Eastern, or North African, don't be confused. That's not an error, that's the truth. Because Italian as a genetic category doesn't exist. What exists are the Northern Italians carrying Celtic and Germanic ancestry from thousands of years of Alpine migrations, Central Italians carrying the cosmopolitan mixture of Imperial Rome, and Southern Italians carrying Greek, Arab, and North African ancestry from when their region was the crossroads of Mediterranean civilizations. The three Italies, each with its own genetic signature, each with its own history. Italy is not just a country, it's a vertical timeline of human migration, a narrow peninsula that every major civilization had to cross to reach somewhere else. And each one left footprints in the DNA that no amount of political unity can erase. The Anatolian farmers who brought agriculture 7,000 years ago. The Greeks who built their greatest cities on Italian soil. The Celts and Germans who flooded across the Alps. The Romans who built an empire and became genetically Middle Eastern in the process. The Arabs who turned Sicily into a jewel of medieval civilization. The Normans who conquered the south and mixed with everyone already there. This is why Italy has the highest genetic diversity in Europe. Not because Italians are mixed, but because Italy is three separate populations forced by geography and history to share the same boot-shaped peninsula. To be Italian is to carry the DNA of the entire Mediterranean basin, the Atlantic coast, the Balkans, North Africa, the Middle East, Central Europe, all of it compressed into one narrow strip of land that everyone had to cross and many decided to stay. Next time someone tells you they're Italian, ask them which Italy, because genetically there are three answers, and each one tells a completely different story about who they really are and where their ancestors actually came from. Check your DNA results again. Don't look for Italian. Look for the story within the percentages. The Greek sailor who colonized Magna Graecia. the Germanic knight who crossed the Alps, the Anatolian farmer who brought wheat to a hunter-gatherer continent, the Arab governor who ruled Sicily, the Jewish merchant who settled in Rome, they're all there, written in genetic code that 2,000 years of history couldn't erase. If you found this journey through Italy's genetic complexity fascinating, make sure to like this video and share it with anyone who's curious about their own hidden heritage. Have you gotten unexpected results on a DNA test? Share your story in the comments below. We all carry history in our genes. The only question is whether we're willing to learn what it really says about who we are and where we came from. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.